All right. So this is chapter 7, uh, the asset market, money and prices. So in this chapter, we are going to talk about the third market that is essential for understanding the overall macroeconomy. And the asset market itself is a market where the real and financial assets are being purchased and sold by various buyers and sellers. So asset market is a combination of various assets. It may include the stock market, it may include the currency market, it may include the bond market, it may include the real estate market, it might include the gold market. So all these various kinds of markets are known as asset market, like because all these various kinds of assets are lumped together, and they are studied using a common framework which is provided by the forces of demand and supply in all these asset market, and we call that asset market. So we'll be understanding a third market model of our course, because in the labor market model we talked about the overall employment in the national economy, like how the interaction between employer and employees, how the interaction between employers and employee leads to a kind of equilibrium where employees are willing to supply their labor and employers are willing to hire them at a fixed market wage. And this whole idea determines the overall number of labor working in various businesses, industries in the country. And then in the last two chapters, chapter 5 and chapter 4, uh, which were specifically focused on the idea of goods market of the economy, like the demand side of the economy, where we try to understand the idea that if it is a closed economy, the goods market condition is this, and if it is an open economy, which is a more real economy, the goods market equilibrium condition was different. But in this chapter, our focus will be on understanding the basic forces of asset market. And by asset market, I mean the demand and supply of various assets, which includes real and financial assets. Real assets means assets like houses, and financial assets might be stocks, bond, government securities, private securities, currencies, gold, and all such kind of assets are to be included. After that, because economists have also considered money as one of the assets, because they think that money is one of the assets, so they have defined the definition of money differently than what common people are, the what common notion seems to be prevailing in the economy. So the common idea of money is different than what economists define the idea of money. They say that money is something that is widely used and accepted in payments. So money is one of the asset that is widely used and accepted in payments. So one of the asset that belongs to asset market is money. And you know that various prices in your home country or in any other country are listed in their own currencies. Let's say if you are going for buying a petrol, let's say from a petrol station, you would find out that petrol price in Pakistan is represented in Pakistani rupees. And if you want to buy a grocery from a nearby store, all the grocery shopkeepers will be providing groceries, their goods will be listed in rupees. So because all the prices are listed in rupees, it means that money and prices are interlinked with each other. So our emphasis will be on understanding what is the role of money in affecting the prices. And uh, is it true that a larger supply of money leads to larger prices in the economy, which means that higher money supply can cause inflation? We have been listening from this, like we have been listening this idea from the beginning of the chapter, but we are not yet able to answer it. But this is a chapter where we are going to answer this idea. So this is the whole idea of the chapter. We'll be emphasizing on the asset market. Now later we have the chapter outline, which specifically talks about 5 topics. First, explaining the idea of money, what is money, and then understanding the behavior of wealth holders. Second topic is portfolio allocation and the demand for assets. Now, this is a topic. Portfolio means the basket of assets. Portfolio means basket of asset. Allocation means how the wealth holder decide what and how much of each asset to demand when they are willing to distribute their wealth in various assets. So portfolio allocation and the demand for assets is a topic of a financial economics, because financial economics studies how various investors or wealth holders decide what assets to own and how much of each asset to own. So that is basically the portfolio allocation and the demand for assets. After that, as we said earlier, money is one of the assets that wealth holders demand, even though money does not pay any interest rate, or money pays zero interest rate. The amount of cash that you hold in your pocket pays no interest rate, but if you deposit it in a bank account known as saving account, you would definitely earn some amount of interest over the amount of money that you have deposited into a bank account. So third topic in our list of topic is the demand for money. Like, why do people prefer to hold money? Is it the idea that, or you can say that, is it necessary to hold money, or there is something special significance related to money? Yes, there is special significance. We need to understand that money provides easiness in conducting transactions relative to other assets. Like, bond cannot be exchanged for products. Similarly, uh, like gold is not as liquid as the cash is. So why do people prefer to hold money, and why do people, businesses and other economic agents choose to prefer to hold money in their basket of assets? So this decision has to be understood before we uh, go for understanding the fourth topic in our list of topic, which is asset market equilibrium, where we are going to emphasize on the forces of demand and supply that balances the asset market of the economy. And in the last, we'll be talking about money growth and inflation. So we'll be trying to answer some questions like, larger money supply leads to more inflation, or is it just a myth? And if it is true, what are the mechanisms with which larger money supply leads to larger price level in the economy? So we would be answering all these questions one by one. So let's start with defining the idea of money. Like, economists have their own way of describing the money, because common people observe that a family living in your nearby your house is richer, so you would say that they have a lot of money, and or they have got a lot of wealth. But what economists have defined how economists have defined the idea of money is different. They say that money is the assets that are widely used and accepted as payments. So now you need to emphasize on this definition. Like, money is assets. Assets means plural of assets itself is a plural. It's not the asset. It's a plural, which means that there are various different assets counted as money. And what kind of assets are counted as money? It may be your debit card in this era, and in earlier times, if we go back to 11th 10th century, where there was no money, there were gold coins which were exchanged for buying different goods. And when there were no gold coins, there was a barter system, where people have to find out the person who is willing to, who has the good that you are desiring and who is also willing to exchange the good that you are having. So that was a barter system. So the payment system has advanced from the gold coins, the barter system, to fiat money, the paper money. The paper that you hold, that you call as a cash, is called fiat money. And fiat money is like a paper note which has uh, got a guarantee by the government that this paper note can be used. This paper note has got this much value. Let's say you are having 100 rupees note. This is called uh, a fiat money. And today, in these days where you don't need to have money in your pocket, you just need to have either debit card or credit card. All these are the forms of plastic money. So we are moving towards a cashless society. So in the history, we started from barter system, moved on to gold coins and precious metals, and then to paper money, and then paper money with along with coins, and then now we are moving towards the idea of cashless society, where you don't need to have cash in your pocket to buy various goods and services. So that is why here you can see the term that they have used to describe the idea of money is assets, which means a combination of assets that are widely used and accepted as payments. So things that are rarely used in making payments are not considered as money. What does that mean? Rarely means very not very often, but rarely means, let's say you went for a shopping from a superstore and you don't have cash, and the superstore announced that today we are going to accept, let's say today means that particular day we are going to accept any form of currency. Let's say if you have bond, if you have dollars, if you have any other currency, but you are in the Pakistani boundary, so the only official currency of Pakistan is rupee. So you need to have rupee for buying those products. But that particular, let's say, superstore is asking that you can exchange anything. If you have bonds or any other like currency, you can use that to buy anything you like. So it means that at that particular day, because that offer is only limited to that particular day. So it means on that day, either the dollar or the bond is used as a medium of exchange. That is why it can be counted as money. But because it is rarely possible that you are able to exchange any other official currency in your home country's boundaries to buy various goods, so it is considered as it is a part of money, but it cannot be considered as it cannot be used as uh, payments. So so this assets means a wide range of assets that are widely used in conducting transactions. So after that, like I need to give you another example. In a US prisoners war camp, there's a case study in your book, a small case where they have described the idea of how cigarettes were used as a currency or money in a prisoner camp. Like all the prisoners were exchanging cigarettes for buying all other goods they need. So in that particular camp, the medium of exchange or the money was cigarettes. And so this is how sometimes like there's no fixed definition of money, because here we have a general idea of money, that assets that are widely used and accepted as payments are considered as money. Now there are specific functions that money performs. Number one, medium of exchange. Now the medium of exchange function is money can be used to buy various goods and service, or money can be used in exchange. In exchange, if you have money, you can buy anything you like. If you don't have the money, so when there was no money, there was a barter system. And in barter system, let's say if I'm a wheat producer and I need rice, I need to find out someone who is producing rice and is willing to buy my wheat. So this was a time taking process and inefficient too. So what people started doing when there was no money, they started producing everything by themselves, which led to what? Which led to deviation from the concept of specialization. Let's say I need food, I was cultivating food. I need clothes, I was let's say stitching my own clothes. So there was no concept of specialization when there was a barter system. So when the money came into existence, so people don't need to find out the person who is willing to exchange the good they need. Rather, they need to have some money and they can directly go to the shop and buy the products they need. So it means that with the introduction of money, uh, there was like uh, the time and cost that people were incurring before to find out the relevant person. So this was saved a lot, and people were able to focus on what they are good at. Like a wheat producer does not need to find out a rice producer. Rather, he would sell out his wheat into the market to consumers of wheat, earn some money, and then go to buy rice. So this is how introduction of money facilitated a lot and guided people to focus more on specialization rather than producing everything by themselves. So this is why one of the essential function that money perform is medium of exchange. Another function that money perform is known as unit of account. Now, unit of account means because money is used to assign economic value to different products. And in a country like Pakistan, you would find that wages of workers, asset prices, prices of various goods and services, all are listed in Pakistani rupees. It means that Pakistani currency is counted as money, and it is used to assign economic value to various goods and services. That is why money also performs the function of unit of account, which means money is used to value different goods and services. Now, when you are these two, medium of exchange and unit of account, are also linked with each other. In what way? Like when you are using money as a medium of exchange, it automatically means that when you are, let's say, using money to buy various goods and services, the prices of those goods and services have already been listed in the units of money. So it means that when you are using money as a medium of exchange, it naturally means that you are using all money as a unit of account. But there is one case where both of these functions are different from each other. And what is that one case? If in a country the prices are not remaining stable, like they are sometimes increasing with a very smaller rate and sometimes increasing with a very faster rate, so businesses might experience that their sales would also fluctuate in response to prices, because definitely buyers would react over the changes in prices. So what the businesses are doing, they are trying to uh, stabilize the prices by using a different unit of account. They might use gold to like uh, give economic value to different products. They might use dollar because it is one of the stable currency, although it is not the official currency of that country. But they are using dollar to list to assign economic value to their products, so that their sales and prices can remain stable. So in this way, the medium of exchange might not be the dollar, but the unit of account is listed in dollar because of the fluctuation in the prices of the domestic currency. So it means that inflation is something that is the main cause of a difference in unit of account and medium of exchange. When there is larger inflation, businesses might not use the domestic currency as a fair unit of account. They would either prefer a stable currency, which makes their prices stable, and then they can sell out the output that they want. So this is how unit of account might vary from medium of exchange, although both are linked with each other. The third one, third essential function of money is the store of value. Store of value means money can be used to accumulate wealth. Now, what is the example of this? If let's say an accountant is receiving 100,000 as a income, monthly income. Now he is using half of his income in a month and half is being saved in his account. So 50,000 which he is consuming is not the store of value, but the 50,000 that he has kept in his account, can be considered as a store of value. So he is having money in his account. So it means that money can be used to store the value, which means to accumulate wealth. But how good money is, like whether holding money is a good store of, like whether money is a good store of value or not, it depends on the rate of inflation in the country. Like how, if inflation is larger, definitely the money can buy fewer goods and services. And as money does not pay any interest rate, holding money might be risky in that country where there is a lot of inflation. So it is better to hold stock, bond, or any saving account which might provide some interest rate, rather than holding money which does not pay any interest rate. So it is not desirable to hold money in a country where there is a lot of inflation, because inflation is ultimately going to reduce the purchasing power of your savings, and money does not pay you any interest rate. So people wealth holders in inflation, in countries where there is a lot of inflation, they choose to prefer, they choose to store the value or accumulate wealth in the form of other asset rather than money. So this is how the role of inflation in defining whether money is a good store of value or not, uh, is affected by inflation. In countries where there is deflation, people might prefer to hold, if the other assets are offering lower return, people might prefer to hold their wealth in the form of money. So these are all the functions of money that you need to consider while discussing the idea of money. Sure. Store of value means money can be used to accumulate wealth. So I said that a person who is having 50,000 salary, he's spending half of his salary in a month and half is being saved in his account. So it means that money can be used as a store of value. Half of his salary is being uh, saved in his account, so he's basically storing the value by uh, like cutting half of his income into expenditures and half into using his income in half of his income in saving, and remaining in the as accumulation for wealth. But it depends how good money is, as how like whether it's good to hold money in the farm in, as a store of value, is dependent on inflation. If there is lower inflation, then it might be preferable to hold money to store value. But when there is a lot of inflation, people might not prefer to hold their wealth in the form of money, because money does not pay any interest rate. But bonds, stocks, securities, and other assets are as interest bearing. So people in high inflation countries prefer to hold their money in various other assets that might provide some rate of return over a certain period of time. But holding money does not pay any interest rate, so people might not use money as a store of value. So this has been discussed, like barter system was, and in it's like this is the first function of money that we have discussed. Barter system is inefficient because there was a double coincidence of wants. Double coincidence of wants mean you have to find out the person who is willing to exchange the product that you need, and he's also willing to take the product that you have. So this is double coincidence of want. That was too much time taking and costly. So people started producing everything by themselves, which makes what? Which makes the barter system inefficient. Second, second idea is money allows people to trade. All right. So when there was introduction of money, people were able to trade their labor for money and use that money for buying goods and services, which saved a lot of time and effort. and money allowed people to specialize rather than produce everything by themselves. So this was the benefit uh, which which caused the money as to function as a medium of exchange. Unit of account is very clear. We talked about unit of account as a as the money is basic unit of measuring economic value of goods and services, assets, and money simplifies a comparison between prices, wages, and income. The unit of account is closely linked with a medium of exchange. We also know that countries with very high inflation may use a different unit of account. As I mentioned, that if prices in Pakistan are, let's say, Pakistani currency is not very much stable, then the businesses might use any other currency to value their products. So the medium of exchange would be different than the unit of account in the country. I also talked about the store of value as well. Now I'm coming to measuring money. So we are now going to talk about the measurement of money. Like, what are the ways? Is there any thin line between what is money and what is not money? So we are going to understand this idea. So economists have developed some measures which are called monetary aggregates. So to distinguish between what is considered as money and what is not considered as money is very difficult task. For example, here the money market mutual fund example is being taken. So money market mutual funds are the uh, organizations that issue stocks to their customers, and customers can write checks and withdraw some amount of money. And money market mutual funds are organizations that issue stocks to their customers and borrow the funds from their customers and use that funds on various other projects and provide the rate of return to their holders, to the holders of stock. So money market mutual fund is a way, or the organization with which organizations are going to borrow from the public by issuing stocks, and the holder of stocks have also got the opportunity to write down a check and withdraw the amount of money. So this is a kind of asset, but these organizations are going to use that amount of money which they have borrowed from their stockholders to various other uses, and ultimately at the end of the year, or at the end of the period, they are going to provide some rate of return over the stock. So can we call these, are they money? We are not sure. Like, we are not yet sure. We just understood that it's a kind of stock that holder of stock can use to, let's say, withdraw some money, but we are not yet sure whether it's called money or not, because there is no single best measure of money. So economists have categorized liquid assets, the assets which are easily convertible into cash and other goods and services, and relatively less liquid asset into another category. So more liquid assets which are convertible into other goods and services in cash are the part of M1 monetary aggregate, and relatively less liquid assets are the part of M2. So we can see in next slide, like when economists were trying to measure the money, they have categorized various assets into most. They have categorized assets into one category, like most liquid assets, which means that assets that are easily convertible into cash and other goods and services, and assets that are less likely to be convertible into cash and other goods and services. So the first monetary aggregate which is in front of you, which we are saying M1 is the first monetary aggregate. You can see the first item in the component of M1 is currency and traveler checks held by public. Currency can be easily convertible into other goods and services. That is why it's a part of M1 monetary aggregate, which is one way of measuring the money. And another part, another like a component of the monetary aggregate is traveler's check. travelers travelers checks are the checks held by travelers of home country to foreigners, because they don't want to carry cash with them. They are carrying checks with them so that they can easily withdraw it from any bank and get some amount of money. So currency and traveler checks are the most nearest forms of money. That is why they are on the top of the list. Next to this, we have demand deposits, but these demand deposit does not pay any interest rate. Now, first you need to understand what the term demand deposit means in economics. In economics, demand deposit means the uh, current account, like the bank account you have in IBA's ABL branch, let's say, so or the JS Bank. So whatever the bank account that you have from like you which you can or which the businesses can use to write checks and borrow, and let's say like they can withdraw the money, and they can also deposit the money. So the current account which does not pay any interest rate, your family is going to send you money into a current account which you can withdraw using a debit card, or you may use a check to withdraw that money. So all such accounts which does not pay any interest rate are the part of demand deposits, which businesses and customers generally use. And because these can be used in making payments and conducting transactions, that is why it is considered as most nearest to money and is a part of M1 monetary aggregate. The third in the list of third component is other checkable accounts. It might include other checkable accounts like your different bank accounts that you as an individual or the business has got, which business use for making payments. So other checkable accounts which does not pay interest are the part of M1 monetary aggregate, because these all are most nearest to money. That is why they are counted in M1 aggregate. So you can see a summary here. All components of M1 are used in making payments. Like these these components are most frequently used in almost all the global economies. Wherever you are, if you have the currency or the traveler check, you can use it for buying, conducting various transactions. Similarly, if you have debit card, you don't need to have a cash. You can even buy various goods and services using your current account. So M1 is closest money measure to our theoretical description of money. After that, we have M2 monetary aggregate, which is another way of measuring money. But you can see a formula here. M2 is equal to M1. Currency plus M1 includes what? Currency plus demand deposits plus all other assets that are less money like. Means all other assets that cannot be frequently used in making transactions. So what are the additional assets that are the part of M2? The first one is saving account, saving deposit. So saving account and saving deposit are same. So deposits that you as an individual or businesses as a economic agent use to save their money are considered as saving account. Saving account provide interest rate to the bearer of that account. So all the savers who deposit money into a saving account into a bank for a specific period of time, they are going to earn some rate of return over it. That is why it is one of the account that is it is one of the account which is a part of M2, and it cannot be it is considered as less money like asset, less liquid asset. That is why uh, it is considered as a part of M2 rather than M1, which includes the most liquid assets. Second is small time deposits. You can see that any amount less than $100,000 can be deposited into a bank account, but for a fixed term period. You cannot withdraw that money before that time period. Let's say you have 100,000 and you want to keep that 100,000 into a bank. Bank provides you various offers, like they will offer you a saving deposit, like where there is no restriction of time limit. If you hold money for 5 years you will earn larger return. So if you hold money into a bank account for larger period of time into a saving account, the saving account will provide larger rate of return. Similarly, fixed deposit, for the fixed deposit you cannot withdraw the money before the fixed period of time. So small time deposits are fixed deposits, fixed time deposits. Like if there is a limit of 100,000, so less than 100, you can keep less than 100,000 of money into a fixed time deposit. Let's say for a 1 year, you cannot withdraw that money before 1 year. If you withdraw it before 1 year, there would be penalty on it, right? So this is another additional asset that is a part of M2, and it cannot, because there are restrictions over it, so it cannot be used as in conducting transactions. So it's a part of less money like assets. So again, we have money market mutual funds, which are the stocks uh, that that pays the rate of return to holders of that particular stock, and the organizations which are going to provide that stocks are going to invest the amount of money that they raise from the public in various alternative uses and earn some rate of return over it. Last asset that is a part of M2 monetary aggregate is money market deposit accounts. These are deposit accounts, but these are offered by the banks. So money market deposit accounts are are similar to money market mutual funds. So money market deposit accounts are the accounts that holders of wealth, maybe consumers, maybe individuals, or maybe businesses, hold to earn the rate of return from the amount of money that they have. So you can see that all these additional assets are the part of M2, and you can see that these various assets are the forms of money, but are less like money. That is why they are counted in uh, a measurement of money, but not very closely related measure of money. So it's relatively less closely related measure of money. That is why it is known as M2. You can see that the assets in M2 are different than M1, but you can also see that M2 also includes the M1 as well. So let me give you some illustration here. So what we have described so far is the measurement of money. Measurement of money. We said that what we said that M1, which is the first monetary aggregate, includes currency plus demand deposits, and M2 includes M1 plus the saving deposit SD plus time deposits TD plus the money market MMF, money market mutual funds, plus MMD, money market demand deposits. This is M2. Now if we just add up these two, M1 plus M2 will give us the overall supply of money in the country. The overall money supply in the country is represented by the sum of M1 plus M2. Now, our next discussion would be on the idea who controls this supply of money, which means that who controls the amount of currency in circulation, which means C1 and demand deposit, and who controls the M2, which includes all other assets and this M1 as well. So M2 monetary aggregate includes saving deposits, time deposits bear interest and have fixed term, which means that you have to deposit your money into a bank account either as a business or as an individual, and you cannot withdraw that money. So it means that it cannot be used frequently in conducting transaction. That is why it is one of the asset that is less money like and is included into M2. And money market mutual fund invest in a very short term securities. So these organizations which issues stocks to their holders ultimately use that money to invest in short term securities and allow check writing to their stockholders. And money market deposits, which are also the part of M2, are offered by banks as a competitor to money market mutual funds. So it means that these are substitutes of each other: money market mutual funds and money market uh, deposit accounts. So after understanding the measurement of money, now we'll be talking about the money supply. So money supply is the stock of money available in the country. Uh, so you can see that money supply is equal to the total amount of money circulating within the country and outside the country. So this is the overall supply of money stock, the amount of money available in the economy. So we raised a question when we said that the amount of money in the country is controlled by the central banking authority of every country. Open market sale, which is opposite of open market purchase. So open market sale is different than, again I'm going to talk about the money supply, but now I'm going to consider the open market sale. Now in open market sale, the central bank will be issuing government, our central bank will be uh, reducing the money supply by selling bonds to the public. Now how does it works? It works in this way. So I'm telling you another way with which central bank. I told you about open market purchase. Now I'm telling you open market sale. Now in open market sale, which is opposite of open market purchase, central bank central bank is going to do what? Central bank is going to, so I was telling you about open market sale, which is opposite of open market purchase. Now here in this open market sell, central bank is doing what? Central bank is selling government bonds to public. To public, right? So central bank is selling government bonds to public, and in exchange, like there is an exchange of bond from central bank to public. But this is, let's say, public. We are placing here the public, and this arrow, public is giving back money to central bank. Let's say this is flow of, here you can place money, and central bank is doing what? Central bank is giving bonds to public. Central bank is giving bonds to public. So in this exchange, what is being controlled in the country? The amount, like against the paper that public is receiving, public is giving back money to the central bank. So overall money supply in the circulation decreases. So here we can summarize the whole idea of open market, that when there is open market sell, OMS, open market sell, it would lead to what? It would lead to selling of bonds. Selling of bonds by whom? By central bank to public. So this would remove what? This would remove or reduce the money supply in the country. So this is the summary of open market sell. So do you got the idea that in this exchange where central bank is selling bonds to public. So this is one, and this is a second arrow. Central bank is selling bonds to public. So public is getting bonds, and in exchange for bonds, public is giving back money to central bank. So this reduces the amount of money in circulation. So this is called open market sell. So now we can summarize the whole discussion by writing open market operations, which is a tool of increasing, which is first tool of increase or controlling the money supply in the country. Open market operations. So in the open market operations, we discussed open market sell, open market purchase. We discussed what? OM, open market purchase, OMP, open market. In open market purchase, using the open market purchase, central bank was doing what? Central bank was using money to buy bonds from public. So this was the channel with which money supply was being reduced. And in open market sell, the reverse is true. In open market sell, central bank is doing what? Central bank is selling bonds, to public. So when central bank is selling bonds to public, ultimately this reduces what? This reduces the amount of money supply, because people are getting bonds, a paper, and central bank is getting money in return. So in this way, open market sell reduces the money supply, and open market purchase increases the money supply in the country. This is one traditional way, or this is one way with which central bank increase or decrease money supply in the country. Another way that we need to consider is direct interaction between government and the central bank. Now, how that direct interaction is possible? In and the next method that we are that I am going to talk about, like in poor countries, this method is very common. In developing countries, the government can ask central bank to print money. And why the government can ask central bank to print money? Whenever the government is requiring more money to fund various new projects, government can directly ask the central bank in poor countries to print money the government needed. So let's say government will give, if let's say government is asking central bank to print 1 billion rupees. So against the 1 billion rupees, central bank will be given bonds. So government will be issuing 1 billion bonds to central bank, and central bank will be giving 1 billion new notes to government, and government will be using it to, let's say, uh, buy military equipments, let's say build new hospital and other. So it means that government in poor countries fulfill their expenditure by borrowing from the central bank of the country. Now this is very common in poor countries. That is why in poor countries the central bank is not as independent as in rich countries. In rich countries, the central bank may not, like the government may not ask the central bank to print money to pay for their to fulfill their expenditure, because it is very common in developing countries that almost every government runs a budget deficit of very larger amount. So when the government is already running a budget deficit and they know that their tax revenue would always be lower because there's a theft, there's always theft in the tax revenue. So more businesses are not willing to pay taxes. So there is always a larger tax target and there's a very lower tax revenue collection. So every time when the government is preparing a new budget for the like central bank can increase money supply by using newly printed money to buy financial assets from the public, which is called open market purchase. So open market purchase is going to increase the money supply, and to reduce the money supply, sell financial assets like bonds to the public to remove money from circulation in an open market sell. So open market purchase and sales are called open market operations. So now you know that open market sell and purchase combinedly are called open market operations. In open market purchase, central bank is going to purchase financial asset from public in exchange for money. So public will be getting money, and central bank will be public will be getting money in public will be getting money in exchange of financial assets. So financial asset will be given to central bank. So in this way, money supply increases in through open market purchase. In an open market sell, central bank sells financial securities to public so that amount of money in circulation can be reduced. So another way that we say it is very common in poor countries is that uh, could also buy newly issued government bonds directly from the government. This is same as government financing its expenditure directly by printing money. So now do you got the idea that this is the same as government financing, managing its expenditure. Government is financing its expenses using the newly printed money. This happens frequently in some countries, though is forbidden by law in United States. So in countries like US, it is forbidden, but is very common in other countries. Throughout the text, we'll be using M to represent money supply, which is sum of, this might be M1 or M2 or the combination of both. Now our next discussion is on the idea that now our next topic is on understanding the idea that if let's say you are having a wealth of 1 million, how you are going to use your wealth, like what kind of assets you prefer to hold and in what quantities you demand those assets. So your decision about how much assets you want to hold and what quantities of those assets you want to hold comes under the discussion of portfolio allocation and the demand for assets. Now, what does that mean? This means that how do people allocate their wealth among various assets? This is called the portfolio allocation decision. I earlier told you that portfolio is a basket of assets. So what basket of assets seems suitable to you as a wealth holder to divide your wealth among those assets? So we'll be understanding what are the factors that wealth holders consider while making this choice, that what kind of assets they want to hold and in what quantities. So if someone has got wealth of 10 million, what kind of asset he is willing to hold, whether he is willing to hold property, whether he is willing to hold his wealth in stocks, bonds, securities, or foreign currencies. Why, like what are the factors he considers while making this choice? So this portfolio allocation and the demand for asset is a topic which will help us in understanding why the wealth holder demand a particular basket of assets compared to uh, like other assets. Like why, let's say, one investor or one wealth holder is demanding 5 asset basket portfolio, then 2 asset basket portfolio. What are the factors he considers? So we'll be understanding these in our discussion of portfolio allocation and the demand for asset. The first factor that all the wealth holders consider is the rate of return. Now, you know, the rate of return is an increase in the asset's value per unit of time. Let's say you bought, you have, like, let's say $100,000 and you are willing to buy stocks. Each stock has a price of $1,000, and if you hold those stock for a year, you would get uh, $1,500 in a year. So 1,000 is a price that you are paying for buying that, and $500 is the rate of return that you are going to have after some period, after 1 year. So this means that 500 is a rate of increase in the value of stock that you hold for 1 year. So similarly, you have 100,000 and you want to deposit 20,000 out of those 100,000 into a bank account, or you might be willing to deposit all into a bank account looking at the expected rate of return that bank offers. Let's say on a 100,000, bank offers 10% rate of return to you. So rate 100,000 is a principal amount plus 10% of 100,000 is a rate of return. So this would be considered as expected rate of return that you will receive if you prefer to hold your wealth in a bank account, in a saving account. Similarly, you can see that here is an example of corporate stock, a private corporation stock that you are buying, and the rate of return on that is equivalent to the dividend yield that you receive on it. Which means whenever the company whose stock you have purchased is making a profit, a portion of it goes to the shareholders. So the dividend that you receive from that company is the part of the rate of return, plus the overall increase in the price of a stock is also the rate of return that you might consider while buying a corporate stock of a company. So it means that every investor try to, or every wealth holder compares the rate of return among various assets and decide which one offers a higher rate of return and choose to hold it. So investor want assets that with the highest expected rate of return, everything else equal. And why we are taking expected rate of return? Because the actual rate of return is not known while making an investment decision. So how do we summarize this idea? We can summarize this idea in this way by saying that the demand for assets, which comes under the topic of portfolio allocation of asset. Demand for asset maybe by an individual or by a business, depends on what? The expected rate of return. Expected return. So everything else equal. Everything else means all other factors are same. If an asset offers larger expected return, let's say if expected return on X asset is larger than expected return on Y asset, then definitely the investor will prefer to go for A than Y. So he will prefer X asset rather than Y. Now you can take X equal to bonds and Y equal to, let's say, Y equal to interest on a stock. So if the bond is offering larger rate of return, the investor would prefer to hold more bond in the to more bond compared to the asset. He will try to divide his wealth by spending more on bonds than stocks. So this is what this is how expected return affects the choice of assets that investors or wealth holders are willing to hold. Now, the next factor that affects the demand for asset uh, by the wealth holder. So, wealth holder might also consider the risk factor. So, risk is the degree of uncertainty in an asset's return. So, what does that mean? When you are not Sure, when you are not certain whether the amount of return that you are expecting will be equal to the actual rate of return, then you might not invest on that on that asset. Like people are more risk averse, they are not risk takers. So in general people are more risk averse. That is why they will always prefer to invest their wealth on something that is less risky rather than on an asset that is more risky. Let's say uh, let's say a company similar to Food Panda is issuing new shares, and all the because this is a new company and there is higher risk in buying that share, that company might default in a very shorter span of time. But if the company earned the profit, every shareholder will get 10 times higher rate of return than uh, any other asset. So all the risk takers will buy that asset. But if a government bond is offering less rate of return, if a government bond is offering less rate of return and is less risky compared to the company like similar like Food Panda, then people would buy more of Food Panda's stocks rather than like people would prefer to buy a risky asset, like in our example government bond, rather than investing it on private companies stock. So risk is the degree of uncertainty. Higher the risk, lower would be the demand for asset. Lower the risk, higher would be the demand for that asset. We can summarize this here. We can summarize the second factor as risk. So risk is the degree of uncertainty between the return that you are expecting to receive and the return that you will actually receive. If the return that you are expecting uh, and the return that you are actually receiving are not matching, let's say actual return is lower than the expected return, then that particular asset would be more risky. So a higher risk, whenever there is a higher risk from an asset, so people would demand less of it, demand for that asset would fall, right? So you can write this way: when the expected return from an asset is larger, the demand for that asset will be larger. So this is a second. This is first factor. Third factor is the liquidity. Third factor is liquidity of that asset. Now liquidity means what? Liquidity means the easiness with which the asset can be converted into money. The easiness with which the asset can be converted into money is considered as a third factor that a wealth holder uh, keep in his mind while making or a purchase of an asset. So liquidity is the easiness and quickness with which an asset can be traded for other goods. Money is the most liquid asset. Assets like automobile and houses are very illiquid. And why they are illiquid? If you are willing to buy goods and services and you don't have money, you have automobile. First you have to find out a buyer who is willing to buy your automobile, then you will be able to buy goods. You cannot directly buy goods by exchanging automobile, because you need cash, you need money. Automobile is a physical asset. Houses are uh, real asset. Houses and automobile are real asset. So these two assets, like if you need to buy some other goods, you cannot exchange house for that. You need to find a suitable buyer for the house who is willing to pay suitable price that you are wishing to receive. And once you receive that price, then you will be able to buy the other goods. It means that transaction might take longer time. That is why we are saying that these kind of assets are relatively illiquid. Stocks and bonds are fairly liquid compared to automobile and houses, because the stocks that you purchase from the stock market uh, can be sold out easily just by making a call to your broker that I am willing to sell out these stocks at whatever the running price the stock market is offering. So he would just sell out those stocks and transfer you the money that you are uh, expecting from those stocks. So investor prefer the liquid assets. So whenever the investor is willing to make investment choice, he will definitely consider the liquidity of an asset. So if an asset is relatively liquid than other asset, he would demand more of that asset. So you would write it here in this way. You would say that uh, if an asset is more liquid, liquidity of asset A is larger than liquidity of asset B. Let's say liquidity of B. So the demand for A would be larger than the demand for B. So this is how it works. So now we know all these four factors. Let me just summarize it here. So we saw the idea of demand for assets by some investors. Investors can be individuals, investor can be businesses. Demand for assets, right? So while making a decision about what assets to demand and how much of asset to demand, the wealth holder will definitely compare the expected rate of return from that asset. An asset, let's say there are five assets, and out of all those five, expected return on first one is higher. So when the expected return on first one is higher, the demand for first one will always be higher. Similarly, most of the individual are risk covers, which means they avoid to take risk. So an asset with lower risk will be demanded in larger quantities, keeping everything else same. Similarly, an asset with higher liquidity, so liquidity, when the liquidity of an asset is higher, demand for that asset will be higher. In last, we'll be comparing time to maturity. So a larger time to maturity means larger risk. So like a larger, like time to maturity applies to bonds only. It applies to bonds. So we said that there are short-term bonds, small time, like small term, short-term bonds, and long-term bonds. Short-term bonds offer lower rate of return because there is lower time to maturity. Long-term bonds offer larger rate of return because there is larger time to maturity. So all these are four factors that ultimately affect the demand for asset by various investors in the economy. So this is the theory of portfolio allocation and demand for assets.